I first noticed it 2 weeks after moving into my uncle's old house. The house itself was unremarkable, just a small, one-story home tucked away on the edge of a thick forest. My uncle had lived there for decades before passing away, and since I was his only remaining family, I inherited the place. I wasn't particularly excited about the move. It was a lonely house in an even lonelier town, but I didn't have many options. I lost my job a few months prior, and my savings were dwindling. A free house, even one in the middle of nowhere, was better than nothing. At first, everything seemed normal. The place had that old house smell, a mix of wood, dust, and something faintly earthy. The floors creaked in the way old floors do, and the pipes groaned whenever I turned on the water. Nothing unusual, but then I started noticing the leaves. The house was surrounded by massive oak trees, their branches stretching so far over the roof that I could hear the occasional thump of an acorn dropping onto the shingles. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the distant hum of insects and watching the sun set behind the treetops. And every evening, I would hear the leaves rustling. Not just a few leaves shifting. It sounded like something moving through them, like a strong wind brushing against the branches. But the air would be completely still. At first, I thought maybe it was just an animal. A bird, a raccoon, something scurrying through the trees. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The sound didn't come from one spot. It moved, slowly, deliberately, almost like footsteps, but only in the trees. And always at dusk, I tried to ignore it. I really did. But each night, as the sun dipped lower, the rustling would begin. One evening, I stood on the porch and focused hard on the treetops. The leaves twitched and swayed, but there was no wind, not even a breeze. Yet the rustling continued, closer, nearer, like something unseen was pushing through the branches. Then, just as I felt a cold prickle creep up my spine, it stopped. Completely. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my chest started to burn. And just as I exhaled from the thickest part of the tree line, a single leaf drifted down to the ground. I don't know why, but the sight of it filled me with an unshakable sense of unease. I went inside. I locked the door. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept with the lights on. The next morning, I told myself I was being ridiculous. The mind plays tricks, especially in unfamiliar places. My uncle had lived here for decades without any issues. If there was anything to be afraid of, he would have said something. Trying to shake the unease, I spent the day cleaning out the house. That's when I found the room. It was in the far corner of the house, near the back door, a small, windowless room I hadn't paid much attention to. The door was different from the others, thicker, older, and painted a deep, almost black shade of brown. Something about it made my skin crawl. Still, I turned the knob. It was locked. That was strange. The house was old, but I hadn't seen any keys anywhere. I frowned, stepping back, and that's when I saw them. Scratches. Faint but deliberate, long, thin marks along the wood near the doorknob. Like someone had tried to pry it open, or like something had tried to get out. A chill crept up my neck. I took a step back, then another. I decided I didn't need to open that door. Not yet. That night, the rustling returned. It started earlier than usual, before the sun had even fully set. Sitting on the porch, I clenched my jaw as I listened to the unnatural shifting in the trees. Something felt different this time. It was closer. The movements weren't just in the distance anymore. They were right above me. I looked up. The branches trembled slightly, leaves shivering. And then, I swear I heard a whisper. Not words, just a sound. Soft, low, coming from directly above me. I leapt to my feet, my chair scraping against the wooden porch. The whispering stopped, and from the treetops, a single leaf floated down, landing gently at my feet. I backed away, heart hammering. Then, somewhere deep in the woods, I heard a giggle. Soft, distant, but undeniable. Someone or something was out there, watching, waiting, and it was getting closer. I locked every door and window. I made sure the porch light was on. But even as I lay in bed, forcing my eyes shut, I still heard it. The leaves, rustling, moving, shifting, right outside my window. And in the silence that followed, knock. Just once. Soft, gentle, against a glass. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. And after a long, terrifying moment, I heard it again. That same soft giggle. And then, as if whispering just for me, a voice barely audible through the stillness. You hear us now. I didn't sleep that night. The voice outside my window was still ringing in my ears. The words had been so soft, barely more than a whisper, but I had heard them clearly. You hear us now. I lay in bed, rigid, my pulse pounding. The rustling outside had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Watching, waiting. I kept staring at the window, expecting a face to appear. But nothing happened. At some point, exhaustion won over fear, and I must have drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep. I woke to silence. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just complete stillness. The air in my bedroom felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite name. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake the fog of sleep. And then I noticed something. The scratches. They were on my bedroom door. Thin, shallow marks, running in uneven lines near the bottom of the wood, like something had been scraping against it during the night. I stared, throat dry. Slowly, I got out of bed and stepped closer. The marks were fresh. I reached out and ran my fingers over them. A faint sound echoed in my memory, soft scraping against the wood while I lay half asleep. I had assumed it was the house settling. But now, looking at the scratches, I knew better. Something had been inside my house. I spent the rest of the morning searching every inch of the place. I checked the locks, the windows, every single door. Everything was secure. There was no sign of a break-in. No tracks. Nothing was missing. But the scratches remained. And when I stepped outside, the unease only grew. The trees were still. The air was warm. The ground was littered with leaves. But there hadn't been any wind. I crouched down and picked up a leaf. It was dry and brittle in my fingers. I turned it over, and my stomach tightened. There was writing on it. Small, jagged letters etched into the surface like tiny veins. Let us in. My hand started to tremble. I dropped the leaf and took a step back, my eyes scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but I felt something, a presence, watching, waiting. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let fear take control. I sat on the porch, flashlight in hand, staring at the treetops. If something was out there, I wanted to see it. I wanted proof. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the ground. And right on cue, the rustling began. It started far away, deep in the woods, then slowly crept closer. My grip on the flashlight tightened. I forced myself to stay still to watch. The leaves shifted above me, but there was no wind. I aimed the flashlight up, the beam cutting through the darkness. For a second, I saw nothing, just the branches swaying slightly. Then a shape moved. Not an animal, not a bird, something else, something wrong. It was barely visible between the leaves, a shifting mass of shadow and bone. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it watching me. My breath caught in my throat. Then, without a sound, it vanished. The rustling stopped. The night fell silent. And from the darkness of the trees, a single leaf drifted down. I turned and ran inside, slamming the door shut. I locked it. I checked the windows. Then I sat in the middle of the room, gripping the flashlight, heart hammering. I had seen something, and whatever it was, it had seen me too. I wasn't alone out here, and I never had been. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when I opened my eyes, the room was filled with pale morning light. I felt groggy, disoriented, like I'd been drugged. My body ached, my limbs heavy. Then I heard something, a soft, slow creaking. I turned my head. The door to the locked room at the back of the house was open. The thick wooden door, the one that had been scratched. The one that I had never been able to unlock. It stood ajar, revealing darkness inside. I stared, frozen. I hadn't opened it, and yet it was open now. Something had let itself in. Or worse, something had let itself out. The door stood open, a silent, gaping mouth of darkness. I sat frozen on the couch, my breath caught in my throat. The room at the back of the house, the one that had been locked since I moved in, was open now. But I hadn't opened it. My pulse pounded in my ears. My first instinct was to run. Leave the house, get in my truck, and never look back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the sheer wrongness of the situation. Maybe it was the nagging sense that running wouldn't change anything. Or maybe it was something else. A feeling. A pull. I slowly rose from the couch, my knees weak. The house felt too quiet, like the air had thickened, pressing down on me. I stepped forward, one foot in front of the other, towards the open door. The closer I got, the stronger the unease grew. My skin prickled. My fingers twitched. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. But I didn't. I reached the doorway and peered inside. At first, it looked empty. Just a room. Small. Dusty. Bare wooden walls. A single window covered in grime. No furniture except for a warped wooden dresser in the far corner. But something felt off. The air was colder here. Much colder. A faint smell of earth, and something metallic lingered in the air. And then I noticed the leaves, scattered across the floor, dry and brittle, crumbling under the slightest touch. My stomach tightened. How had leaves gotten in here? I took a hesitant step inside, the floorboards groaning beneath me. A sense of unease pressed into my chest, thick and heavy. The dresser loomed in the corner, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust. But something was wrong with it. The bottom drawer was slightly open. Not much, just a crack, but enough. Enough to see that something was inside. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. And then, without meaning to, I reached for it. My fingers brushed the edge of the wood. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavier, denser, like I had disturbed something that had been asleep. I hesitated, and then, slowly, I pulled the drawer open. Inside was a single object, a bundle of leaves, tied together with brittle, yellowed twine. I stared at it, my breath shallow. The leaves were dry and fragile, just like the ones outside. But these were marked. Scratched into the surface of each leaf were words. Tiny, spidery letters, etched in thin, jagged lines. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and picked up the bundle. And I read, "Do not open the door." A chill ran down my spine. I flipped to another leaf. "They whisper when you sleep." My mouth went dry. A third, "You let them in." My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the bundle. And then I heard it. A rustling sound. Soft. Right behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly. The room was empty, but the leaves on the floor, they were moving. Just slightly, like something was breathing beneath them. A single leaf lifted into the air, as if unseen fingers were turning it over. And then, as I watched in silent horror, a word appeared on it, carved into the surface, deep and jagged, as if an invisible knife was slicing through the brittle veins. "Run." I didn't hesitate. I dropped the bundle and bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved. My skin was damp with cold sweat. And then I heard the lock click. I stepped back, heart hammering. The door that had been opened just moments ago was locked again, as if it had never been open at all. I didn't go near that room for the rest of the day. I sat on the couch, gripping my flashlight, jumping at every tiny sound. By nightfall, exhaustion took over, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. And then the whispers began. Soft, distant, just outside my window. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could hear them. Rustling leaves and voices. "You let us in." The next morning, I found leaves inside my house, scattered across the floor. I picked one up, hand shaking. The message was carved deep into its surface. Not alone anymore. The leaf in my hand was cold, unnaturally cold. Not alone anymore. The words were scratched into its brittle surface as if something had clawed them in from the inside. My breath came in shallow gasps, my fingers trembling as I set the leaf back on the table. I didn't know what to do. I had spent the entire night hearing whispers outside my window, soft, rustling sounds that seemed to shift and move, growing closer, then fading, as if something was circling my house. Now, in the daylight, my mind screamed at me to leave. Pack a bag. Get in my truck. Go. But something held me back. Something about this house, this thing, wasn't finished with me yet. And I wasn't sure if running would even make a difference. I stood slowly, my body stiff from the tension that had coiled inside me all night. The living room was unnaturally still. Dust hung in the air, caught in the slanted morning light. But the leaves were everywhere, scattered in small piles, on the floor, on the kitchen table. A trail leading toward the back of the house, toward the room that had locked itself. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to go back there, but I had to. The hallway leading to the room was colder than the rest of the house. Each step felt heavier, like I was walking through thick, unseen layers of something wrong. I reached the door, the locked door, except now it was open. I froze, my breath catching. I could see the dresser inside, the leaves still strewn across the floor. But something was different. The air was moving. A faint, almost invisible ripple, like heat distortion, except it was cold. A whisper of wind that shouldn't exist in a room with no open windows. And then I saw the drawer, the one I had opened yesterday. It was open again. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. The leaves didn't move this time, didn't rustle, didn't shift. But I felt them, watching, waiting. I hesitated, then reached for the drawer again, my fingers grazing the rough wood. Inside, there was something new, Not just leaves, but a photo, yellowed with age, its edges curled, the image faded but still clear enough to see. A group of people, standing outside what looked like this very house. 8 of them, men and women, their faces shadowed, their expressions too blank to be natural. The trees behind them were twisted, gnarled. Leaves swirled around their feet, frozen mid-motion in the captured moment. I turned the photo over. There was writing on the back. Faint, smudged, as if someone had written it in a hurry. We opened the door. We shouldn't have. My stomach dropped. I turned back to the dresser, digging through the drawer now, searching for more. And then I found it. A journal. Its leather cover cracked, pages worn thin, filled with cramped handwriting. I flipped to the first entry. The leaves started appearing inside a week after we moved in. We thought it was the wind. Then the door opened by itself. I turned the page. The whispering happens at night. Always outside. But it's getting closer. Another page. We tried to leave. The car wouldn't start. The leaves were inside the car. A chill ran through me. I flipped further ahead, my fingers trembling. We heard them in the house. The door wouldn't shut. The drawer wouldn't stay closed. It doesn't matter what we do. It's too late. My breath came fast and shallow. The final entry was dated October 2nd, 1987. We let them in. I slammed the book shut, my pulse thundering in my ears. My vision swam. Who were they? What had happened to them? And why was I finding this now? The house felt different after that. More alive. Or maybe not alive at all. Maybe just watching. I avoided the back room for the rest of the day, but it didn't matter. The whispers were inside the house now. I heard them from the kitchen, in the hallway. Soft voices. Not quite human. Not quite there. And the leaves, they were appearing in places they shouldn't be. Under my pillow. In the sink. Inside my shoes. By nightfall, I was too exhausted to think. I curled up on the couch, gripping the journal, my mind replaying the entries over and over. I needed to leave. I needed to get out before thump. I sat up. A sound from inside the house. Thump. Thump. I held my breath. It was coming from down the hall. From the room. I rose slowly, my heart hammering. I didn't want to check. I had to check. I stepped into the hallway, moving cautiously toward the door. And then I saw them. The footprints. In the dust on the wooden floor. Not mine. Not human. Too long. Too thin. Leading out of the room. Leading toward me. A breath of cold air brushed against my neck. And then I heard the whisper, right beside my ear. We never left. I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath hitching in my throat. The whisper had been right next to me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body screamed that if I turned, if I so much as breathed wrong, I would see something that shouldn't be there. Something standing too close. The footprints in the dust were leading toward me. Not away. Something had walked out of the room. Something that had been inside that locked room this whole time. A chill spread through me, deep and sharp, sinking into my bones. The whisper had stopped, but I still felt something behind me. A pressure in the air. A presence I couldn't shake. I forced myself to move. Slowly, step by step, I backed away from the footprints, my hands clenched into fists. I didn't turn my back to the hallway. Not until I reached the living room. Not until I saw the door. Wide open. It had been shut a second ago. Now it gaped like an invitation. Outside, the night was impossibly still. The leaves were piled against the doorway, pressed into the threshold like a barrier, keeping something out, or keeping something in. I had to leave. Now, I grabbed my truck keys off the kitchen counter, heart hammering in my chest. My fingers trembled as I clutched them, my knuckles white. I wasn't staying here another second. I made it to the front porch in 3 strides. The truck sat in the driveway, the metal glinting under the dim glow of the porch light. But something was wrong. The leaves had moved. They weren't just scattered. They were arranged. A pattern. A shape. Words. Don't go. My pulse spiked. I took a shaky step forward, my boots crunching against the dry leaves. Something rustled in the trees. A soundless rustle. The leaves shifted without wind. And then I saw them. Dark shapes. Deep within the tree-line. Standing. Watching. Motionless. Not people. Not shadows. Something else. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers gripping the truck keys so hard my nails bit into my palm. I forced myself to move. I ran. I yanked the truck door open, practically throwing myself inside. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, stuttered, and died. No, 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 no. I twisted the key again. Nothing. I could feel them, watching me. The air outside felt thicker. Something was changing. I slammed my fist against the wheel. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark, waiting. Then a whisper from inside the truck. It won't let you. I froze. The whisper had been inside. I turned my head and saw it. In the rear-view mirror. A shape in the back seat. A figure. Thin. Unmoving. Its head tilted too far. Watching me. I screamed. I lunged for the door, scrambling out of the truck, falling onto the gravel driveway. My palms scraped against the rough ground, but I didn't stop. I ran back to the house. Back inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me. The house felt different now. Alive. The walls creaked. The floor shifted under my feet. The air was thick with something unseen. I backed against the wall, my chest rising and falling in frantic gasps. I wasn't alone. I knew that now. The house wasn't just haunted. It was occupied, and it didn't want me to leave. A whisper slithered through the room. They never left. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned toward the hallway. The footprints were gone, erased, but something new had taken their place. A door, one that wasn't there before. A door at the end of the hall, slightly open, waiting, inviting, breathing. I didn't want to go inside, but I had no choice. I stepped forward. The hallway felt endless. The walls seemed to close in around me, stretching, warping. The door grew closer, and then I was inside, a room I had never seen before. The walls were covered in scratches. The floor was covered in leaves. And in the center of the room, a chair. Wooden, old, and someone was sitting in it. No, not someone. Something. Its face was wrong, its limbs too long, and in its hands it held a book. The journal, the one I had found. But now the pages were full, written in a hand that wasn't my own. Written today, my name, over and over and over. He stays. He stays. He stays. The thing in the chair turned its head. I couldn't move. The house was breathing. The leaves whispered. And then darkness. Epilogue. The house sat silent in the middle of the woods. The wind never touched the leaves that surrounded it. The truck sat abandoned in the driveway, dust settling over the windshield. Inside, the air was still, waiting. A new set of footprints trailed across the dusty floor, leading toward the room. The door at the end of the hall, slightly open, waiting. A whisper drifted through the air, soft, almost human. not alone anymore.